Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's an honour to speak for the SNP on this, the last day of the second meaningful vote debate that we're having. Mr. Speaker, it's probably pretty obvious to everybody in this House what the SNP position is on Brexit, what the SNP position is on the Prime Minister's deal. But just for the avoidance of doubt, the Prime Minister has said today that she wants to deliver on the result of the vote. The people of Scotland voted to remain in the EU. Yeah. Therefore, the SNP will fight and will continue to fight for us to remain in the EU. Yeah. We want to deliver on the vote that Scotland made in that referendum. The best future for all of us is to remain members of the EU. If we can't remain members of the EU, we need to have single market and customs union membership. And I know many members across the House believe that that would be the best way economically for us to go forward. The Prime Minister needs to go away and extend Article 50 in order that we can have a people's vote, in order that we can put to the people the choice to remain in the EU, because we believe, as do many others across the House, that they would make a different choice in relation to this. I want to talk about a number of different things, many of which have been mentioned today. I want to start talking about the economy, as you would expect from the SNP spokesperson on the economy at Westminster. Mark Carney from Bank of England has said that Brexit has already cost families £900 each. £900 per family, given that we have had so many years of austerity. This is £900 that very few can afford easily. The Chancellor himself said clearly remaining in the European Union would be a better outcome for the economy, and that is absolutely the case. Remaining in the European Union would be a better outcome for the economy. Therefore, we will be poorer as a result of the UK choosing to leave the EU. This is why organisations like the CBI, who said they are watching in horror, this is why they are watching in horror, because of the foreseeable economic catastrophe that the UK is choosing to bring upon itself, and in such a ham-fisted way that it is going about it. There have been an awful lot of people who have come out with an awful lot of statements in relation to stats around Brexit. I want to highlight a few of them. The Bank of England has said that with the Prime Minister's deal, we're looking at an potential interest rate of 4%. Now, I want to unpack this a little bit. People who are my age, people who are a little bit older than me, people who have been in the property market for a relatively short period of time, have never seen interest rates anywhere like 4%. It is incredibly difficult for young people nowadays to buy property as it is. If we see a massive increase in interest rates, we will have a situation where it will be absolutely and completely impossible for the vast majority of young people, even more than it is today, to buy property because those interest rates will be so high. It will be very difficult for people to be able to borrow money. And that has an effect not just on individuals, that has an effect on companies who are looking to borrow money as well. And therefore, our small businesses will be less able to trade and to grow as a result of the changes that are potentially coming. Talking about businesses, the University of Bristol has said that the decision has meant that the value of UK companies has reduced by 16% already, and we haven't even left the EU yet. We haven't even left, and the value of UK companies is reduced by 16%. Yet we're continuing to go down this route. Jaguar Land Rover have already cut 1,500 UK jobs, and they're looking to cut another 4,500 UK jobs, most of which will be in the UK. And they've cited Brexit concerns as a major factor in relation to this. And on the subject of car manufacturing, Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about what just-in-time actually means, because it's quite difficult to get that concept into your head. What does just-in-time manufacturing mean? Does it mean that the warehouses, the car production plants, these factories that are producing things, does it mean that they've got maybe a day's worth of goods sitting there, of widgets sitting there that they can put together to make a car or whatever it is that they're making? No, it means, Mr. Speaker, that they've got an hour's worth. They have an hour's worth of widgets sitting there in order that they can put them together to make a car. I'm just going to read this about Honda. If Honda wanted to have 9 days' worth of Honda stock, they would need a warehouse in the UK for their Swindon plant alone A warehouse that would be roughly 300,000 square metres. It would be one of the largest buildings on earth, Mr. Speaker. And that is for 9 days of manufacturing widgets in order to make cars. It is absolutely impossible that the UK can find enough warehousing space to store all of the widgets that they would need for all of the manufacturing things that we produce. And the Secretary of State was earlier talking about all of the brilliant manufacturing that's done in Britain. Huge amount of that is done with imported components from the EU. Now, yeah.
All seriousness, in the early 1990s, I worked in the haulage industry as a lorry driver, doing just-in-time deliveries of brake parts for Lucas Girlings across the whole of Europe, in and out of the EU. There was never a problem because the paperwork could be turned around in the time it took to have a coffee and a cigarette. It wasn't a problem then, and we didn't even have a computer in the office.
In 1993, Mr. Speaker, things were a bit different to how they are now. We have customs checks that require to be done. We have these production lines, these goods that are there. There is much shorter period of time able to be stored there because we have that frictionless movement. If frictionless movement is so unimportant, why is the government been prioritising frictionless movement in relation to the potential future relationship with the EU? And it's not just the EU. The UK government has failed to set out exactly what the future relationship with Turkey is going to look like, for example. Are those widgets that are coming in from Turkey still going to be able to come in the event of a no-deal scenario? Is that going to happen? And the Secretary of State earlier was pressed in relation to the free trade agreement rollovers with third countries. The UK government has absolutely failed to let us or businesses know which countries have agreed to sign up for those free trade agreements to be rolled over in the event of a no-deal Brexit. Given that companies out there, the largest manufacturing ones, are preparing for a no-deal Brexit, the government needs to be upfront and honest about how many of those free trade agreements will actually roll over. I have heard, Mr. Speaker, the potential that it may only be 10 of them are ready to be rolled over. If that is the case, the government needs to tell us which 10, so that the companies that are exporting to or importing from these countries can make plans on that. And on the subject of free trade agreements, and on the subject of fantasy economics, as was raised by the Chancellor, I will, and then I'll finish this point.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and does she also agree with me? It was surprising that we didn't have a clearer answer on this earlier when the Secretary of State was laying out his arguments in today's debate, and it's of paramount importance for businesses like those in my constituency who are trading under multiple trade agreements exporting across the world.
Exactly. I agree, it's absolutely vital, and it was interesting that the Secretary of State, sorry, not the Chancellor, was unable to give that answer. I've actually got a written question down on this. I'm expecting a response on that tomorrow, as it's a named day written question. But I am aware of at least one organisation that has been asking the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy for this list since November, and still have not got this list despite asking for it. If the government intend that we leave the EU on the 29th of March, and if the government intend that if this deal is not voted through that we leave with no deal, they need to tell companies what the scenarios will be that they will be operating under after we leave the EU in this circumstance. They are wilfully making this situation worse by their refusal to come forward with this information.
Will the honourable member give way?
Yeah.
I thank the honourable member. Thank you. I thank the honourable member for making a very powerful speech. Just on that point, particularly in the car industry, I know the BMW Mini, Toyota and the Honda plant in Swindon is actually preparing for 6 days of closure as a result of this Brexit deal. Does my honourable friend agree with me? This is complete chaos, and the government now needs to end any opportunity of no deal in the future.
It absolutely is complete chaos, and the fact that businesses are having to prepare for a no deal because the government continues to hold this over us is absolutely ridiculous, and that's why members across the House have signed a letter saying that no deal scenario is completely unacceptable. And actually, I think as has been said previously, it's one of the few things that there is an actual majority for in the House, is that there should not be no deal scenario. On the subject of free trade agreements and on the subject of fantasy economics, for the paper that was written by the government on the deal scenario and the no deal scenario, on the analysis of the Brexit costs. It talked about future trade agreements, and it talked about a potential of free trade agreements being signed with the US, Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia, Brunei, China, India, Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, Kuwait and Bahrain, plus all of the rolled over FTAs being rolled over on the terms that we have. All of those new free trade agreements would be signed on the basis of there being zero tariffs on everything in the scenarios that were modelled. And all of them would be rolled over, despite the bizarre assumptions that nobody sensible thinks are ever likely to have. We're not going to have a free trade agreement with India with zero tariffs on everything within 15 years. It's absolutely not going to happen. Despite all of those bizarre assumptions, the UK government still predicted that our trade reduction would be 2.2%. So despite the most ambitious assumptions possible that nobody who is in any way realistic even thinks may vaguely come, it still predicts that our trade reduction will be 2.2% of GDP, which is, I don't know how anybody who supports Brexit can stand up and say that we're going to benefit from the increased international trade when it's absolutely clear that we're not, even in the best possible scenarios. And one of the things that the Secretary of State for International Trade is very, very good at is talking about the increase that we've had in international trade with countries like South Korea, who we trade with through the EU's free trade agreement. Yes.
My honourable friend's making an excellent speech on the perils, doesn't she? And I'm wondering, I just wonder if the Chancellor is agreeing with a huge amount of what she's saying at the moment. But what strikes me, the Scottish Government have outlined their economic analysis of what will happen. The UK Government have tried to keep it secret. I wonder if my honourable friend's got any thoughts on why that is the case.
I thank my colleague for coming forward. Do you know what? I think the UK government is trying to say as little as possible about the economic analysis because it knows that Brexit will damage the economy. And I'm specifically focusing on the economy, but I'll move on to talk about other things in a few moments. I just want to raise a few other things in relation to the economy. Investors since the 2016 referendum have pooled $1.01 trillion out of UK equity funds since 2016. That is an eye-wateringly large number, and it comes as a direct result of the referendum. That's according to EPFR, the data provider. I want to talk a little bit about Scotland and the effect that there will be on Scotland as a result. The Scottish Government has said that our GDP would be £9 billion lower under an FTA. That's not under a no-deal scenario, that's under a free trade agreement scenario than if we stayed in the EU. And amazingly, that is significantly more than even the most unionist of commentators said that independence would cost the Scottish people. So we're stuck with the UK, who are making terrible decisions and who are cutting more off our GDP than even those people who are least in favour of independence said would be cut off our GDP. And just, yes.
Thank the Honourable Friend for giving way. She's making an absolutely fantastic point. And is that not the core of it, that nobody, however they voted in the European referendum 2016, actually voted to become poorer? That's all the more reason to put this again to the people in a people's vote so that folk can have their say. Now they know what the consequences of Brexit actually are.
This is absolutely right. People were told stories about unicorns and mermaids. People were told that there would be amazing economic largesse in the event of Brexit. And actually they've been told this for a huge number of years, not just in relation to the Brexit vote, but people have been told by politicians that people who choose to come and live and work in this country from other countries make us poorer. And it is an absolute lie. They contribute to our GDP, they contribute to reducing our public sector net debt, they contribute to our economy, and that is without even going into the cultural and social benefits of people choosing to come and live here.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and it's quite interesting to watch the faces of members opposite as she lays out in very stark detail the impact on the economy. But on consequences, the company Hologic, which is a life sciences company in my Livingston constituency who does diagnostic testing, I have met with a number of times since the Brexit vote, and they have raised significant alarm because they test the safety of medicines, not just for consumers in the UK, but in the EU. And they have highlighted to me the catastrophic effect of the UK government's plans. Does she agree with me that we are heading towards catastrophe if this government continues on the way it's going and its bill is allowed to pass?
I absolutely agree, and she must have read my mind because I'm just about to come on to medicine. In relation to medicine, I want to just comment on what the Nuffield Trust have said. They've said the longer-term arrangements envisioned in the agreement and political declaration generally entail leaving the single market. Unless negotiating positions fundamentally change, this will produce extra costs for medicines and other supplies. Mr. Speaker, there are, from the EU to the UK, 37 million packs of medicine every month. That's every month travel from the EU to the UK. There are 45 million packs of medicine travel from the UK to the EU every single month. If we are outside the single market and we are outside the customs union, that medicine will take longer to travel across those borders in both directions. That medicine will require extra testing in both jurisdictions. Those medicines we will have, if we don't test them, Mr. Speaker, yet we're outside the single market and we don't have common rule book on this, then we are putting individuals at risk by allowing them to be to use medicine that has not been tested and doesn't fit with our regime. Mr. Speaker, a no-deal scenario is absolutely disastrous and cannot be allowed to happen. I just want to briefly mention a couple of things that are not ready in the event of either a deal or no deal. I mentioned earlier the online system for those who are exporting things from the EU to the UK in terms of postal packages, and it's really important that the Treasury gets itself in gear and sorts this out. It promised to do so in a VAT notice that was put in place in August, but it needs to put this online system in place so that individuals or companies that are exporting from the EU to the UK by post can do so. It was particularly telling that the Secretary of State for International Trade talked about e-commerce when he's proposing to take us out of the digital single market, which was quite unfortunate. Some of the other things that are not ready, the postponement scheme for VAT doesn't appear to be ready. If it is ready, companies don't know how to use it. The Treasury and the HMRC, again, need to get the postponement scheme set up so that VAT that is changing from acquisition VAT to import VAT can be postponed and companies won't have to pay that money up front, because that would spell financial disaster for a huge number of companies. And lastly, the thing that also is not ready yet is the CDS system. The CDS system has not been widely rolled out. It's not been rolled out to everybody yet. This is the customs declaration system that companies are going to have to use. There are 145,000 of those companies that have never exported out with the EU and will be reaching this system for the first time. And it's really important that they use this system. It's really important that everybody has the ability to use this system before April, so that any glitches in the system have been gone, in order that actually, if we're not going to have a situation with queues of lorries. We're going to have a situation where we're not even going to be able to load the stuff onto the lorries if this system doesn't work. So it needs to be sorted. It needs to be fixed in advance. Adding a little bit more in the human cost. Mr. Speaker, last week BRC, the British Retail Consortium, announced some more figures in relation to the cost of food after Brexit. They have said that a no-deal scenario would see households in Scotland paying £55.30 more each week on food. £55.30 each week. And the least well-off 10% of households across the UK would be paying £38.50 each week. That would be 6.4% of their income increase in the amount of money they would have to spend on food. Given the squeeze that this government has vested on these families who are at the bottom of the pile, it is incredibly important that the government does what it can to ensure that that no deal is taken off the table. I don't even know why we're still discussing this. Why is no deal still on the table? Why does the Prime Minister not just say, in the event that my deal gets voted down tomorrow, which it will, that she won't have no deal happen to us? She won't have a 6.4% increase in the amount of food. Mr. Speaker, I haven't really touched on migration yet. It was in the Red Book in, I think, 2017 that reducing net migration by 20,000 increases public sector net debt by 0.2% by 2022. That is a fact. Presumably the government stands by the fact that it's a fact because it was in their Red Book. People who choose to come and live and work in this country, in these islands, are net contributors to our economy. They are, on the whole, net contributors to our economy. If you take them as a group of people, they are net contributors to our economy. They make a contribution. We will therefore be poorer economically, fiscally, as a result of reducing net migration by any significant number. The hospitality sector, Mr. Speaker, needs 100,000 new EU entrants per annum. Some people go away, it's not a net figure. 100,000 new EU entrants per annum need to come and work in our hospitality sector. If we're going to be global Britain, if we're going to be a country that wants people to come and enjoy our tourism sector, we need people to actually work in those sectors. Absolutely. And given the population that is ageing that we have in Scotland, we even more in Scotland need people to come and live and work in our country. Absolutely. And that is why the UK government, if it is unwilling to the UK government must change its plans in relation to the £30,000 cap. It must change its plans in relation to the cap on numbers. It must, if it's unwilling to do this, devolve immigration to Scotland. If it doesn't devolve immigration to Scotland, it is making the case ever stronger for Scottish independence. Mr. Speaker, there are EU workers in our care sector, there are EU workers in our manufacturing sectors, there are EU workers in our agri-food sectors, and those sectors rely on them. NFU Scotland today said, we cannot feed our nation without this labour. That is incredibly serious. If we do not have enough people coming to work in our agri-food sector, we will lose the ability to be the world-leading country that we are in that food. We will lose the ability to feed even people who live here, let alone exporting and bringing in the tax revenue that we do from exporting. Mr. Speaker, free movement of people is a good thing. Free movement of people is a brilliant thing. It is a thing that people my age and people younger than me have benefited from. We've been able to go and live and work in EU countries. We've been able to have people from EU countries come and live and work next door to us. And we have benefited from that. It is absolutely devastating to think that this government proposes that my children should not benefit from the same rights we have had from freedom of movement. I do not believe that anybody in this place, that anybody should reasonably be celebrating the end of freedom of movement. It costs us our rights, it costs us money in the government's coffers, it costs us, as the Archbishop of Canterbury said, that Brexit caused proceeding with Brexit caused a moral issue, and I think this is the biggest place where that moral issue stands, is the fact that politicians have done what they can, not all politicians, some politicians have done what they can to demonise immigration and people who are born in other countries. And I think we wouldn't be in the place we are today if that hadn't happened. Mr. Speaker, this is an absolute shambles. I was pleased to see the Financial Secretary was here earlier. I hope he managed to find some food, given the note that he had that said no food and no Channel Tunnel when he left the Cabinet meeting earlier. I'm hoping that those things are a slight exaggeration, but given the increase that there is going to be in the cost of food in the event of a no deal, I think that no food for many families will be a reality. Mr. Speaker, we can't operate like this. As the CBI said, businesses are watching in horror. The Prime Minister needs to remove the threat of no deal. The government is limping on, and the whole world, Mr. Speaker, is watching in horror. There's no good being done in this place just now. There's no other things being done in this place just now. We're entirely focused on Brexit. We're not able to do those things that a global Britain should be doing. We're not able to have any kind of positive impact on the world because we are so unbelievably inward-looking, fighting in this place. Mr. Speaker, there's a word that's used in the northeast of Scotland that's called thran, or thrawn, depending on where you are in the northeast. And if you're thran, you are so determined to proceed with something. You are so determined in the face of all opposition and all sanity and yet you proceed with something because you've said you're going to do it. So you proceed with it, despite all evidence to the contrary, despite every expert telling you that you are wrong. If you're Thran, you are trying to go through with that because you can't bear going back on something that you've said previously. Mr. Speaker, I've said a number of times already, the Prime Minister needs to remove the threat of no deal. What she needs to do when she comes to speak to us tomorrow is she needs to say that in the event that her deal is voted down, she will go to the EU and she will ask for an extension of Article 50 in order for a people's vote to be held so that we can remain in the EU and we won't have this economic, social and cultural catastrophe on us.